Recording in progress. So welcome to our third discussion on textures. How'd you guys make out on Friday with substance? Everybody all right? You guys get the workflow for getting your maps out of substance, getting back into Maya, okay? Good. All right, so today we're going to explore some Maya layering. We're going to be doing projection mapping, which is sort of like decals in Unreal or Unity. And we are also going to be dealing with opacity maps. We're going to be making an alpha channel in Photoshop, bringing that into Maya, using the alpha channel and the diffuse map or color for the wine label. Let's do a quick poll here. How many people did the exterior scene? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And the rest of everybody did the interior, right? Okay. So we got something for everybody today. I'm assuming everybody heard the news the other day. Actually, it was last week that Unity bought out Weta Digital. You guys hear about that? If you're not familiar with Weta, they are the second largest visual effects company on the planet. They always do a lot of work with ILM. In fact, they do like almost half of the Marvel stuff. They've also done all of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits. They're based in New Zealand. It's a big deal for Unity to buy them because that means Unity is going to be pursuing real-time, just like Unreal, real-time virtual production. So that's going to be healthy competition, which is probably going to have Unity kind of up its game a little bit now that they've got all the resources for Weta Digital. Okay, so today, well, we did that kind of brief overview. Office hours this week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 4. Frank and/or Ari will be doing the Zoom Open Lab on Thursdays from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this is optional as always for campus and online. Remember, the link for this, if you're a campus student, is all the way at the bottom of our schedule. It's a separate link from this room. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to be doing opacity maps. We're going to be taking or finding a label for the wine bottle. We're going to be creating an alpha channel in Photoshop, removing the unwanted portions of geometry on that label, and then putting it on the object. And when we render, it will remove all the unwanted parts of it. So it looks like the wine label's glued on. And we'll be able to get 2 maps out of 1 file. We'll have a base color, which is RGB. We'll have an alpha channel, which we will use as an opacity map. Alpha channels are simply black and white information. Like I said, we're going to be doing file mapping, which is projections. We've got a couple logos we provide for you. Layering in Photoshop. A lot of times when you are using projections, you want to project your decal, your sticker on top of an object that already has a texture. Even if it doesn't have a texture and it has a solid color, you still need to have a layering system to be able to do that. Common layering blend modes in Maya, very simple. There are 2 main blend modes that we use a lot. Photoshop, we use a few more just because Photoshop has a lot more of them in there. And Photoshop's layering system is much more robust. We've already talked about adjusting base weight. Also, a couple of very useful Maya utilities. One is called the Remap HSV, which lets us remap our hue, saturation, and value so we can control saturation on maps that we bring in that might be too saturated. So when you guys are looking for critiques, and either I give them to you or Ari or Frank, and we mention something like, okay, nice, but the texture, that red in the texture is way too saturated. You have a couple of choices. You can go into Photoshop, desaturate it, which means you're altering the original file. Possibly you bring it back into Maya, or you can use a Maya utility that will let you route the file node into the remap and then right into your material, and it will allow you to adjust it on the fly in Maya. So they all have their merits. For proof of concept, you can't beat the speed of being able to do something immediately. All right, so opacity maps. This allows us to use a black and white file. Yes. My screen what? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. Huh. I could have swore I turned that on. All right. So can you guys see my screen in? All right, Milton, you did mention that. Thank you. Okay, so screen's good now. All right. So just quick recap. There you go. That's what we were talking about earlier. Here's all the office hours. Here's our agenda. And we are going to talk about opacity maps now. So opacity maps, good for, it's basically a mask. Black and white information, black is removed, white is kept or held. They can be separate files, but if you are trying to create a mask for a file that you're working in, it makes sense to put that information in the alpha channel of that file. This way you can get the shape that you need all in one file. Opacity maps get plugged into the geometry section. There's a little bit of a caveat, as always with everything in Arnold or Maya. So normally we would take the out alpha, pop it into the opacity, but Arnold in its infinite wisdom is not expecting a black and white file. It's expecting a 3-channel RGB file. So what that means is we have to take the out alpha and plug it into all 3 channels manually. If you don't do that, you'll get some cool results, but weird and really not working too well. So that's the only oddity to this. This is the only software renderer I've used that has done that. I'm still trying to figure out why they're doing it, but I suppose it is possible to get 3 different alpha channels out of, yeah, I don't know. Photoshop, when you make an alpha channel, it's an alpha channel. It's black and white information. It's not like you're going to be able to use it. However, I could see where if you are using RGB, you could theoretically load a separate alpha channel into, you could upload or not upload, but create a separate alpha in each one of the RGB channels, break them out and have 3 different opacity maps or masks. That's possible. Practical, not really sure that that would get you anything. All right, so let's see what we have here. So first off, what we need to do is find a label for the wine. Now, this is going to go under the assumption that you're doing the exterior scene. There really is not a need for it in the interior, but the principles are the same. Should you have a label on a bottle or something else you want to use? Doesn't necessarily have to be a bottle. You could be putting labels on top of, your max. You want to make them look like they're glued on there rather than just laying flat on the same surface. These work out really well. However, they do require separate pieces of geometry, which is why we have the wine label wrapped around the bottle. And we hid that in project 6. But for this assignment, we're going to unhide it. Exterior, let's do the Zen. All right, let's throw that on a separate layer. That's the other day from lecture. Don't really need that. And here is our label that we threw onto a separate layer. And looks like we have red wine. So we'll need to find a label for red wine. Yep, red wine. Okay. So first thing you want to do is obviously have a new AI standard surface on your object. All right, as always, find reference. And just before you get too excited, don't forget size, you want large, so it's at least 1K. So, you know, any shape will do, but if you're going to go through the trouble of cutting out the geometry, it always makes sense to try and find something that's visually interesting rather than just a rectangle or a square. It is usable. There are plenty of labels that do that, but, you know, artistically, it's always nice to have a little bit more. So with this one, this isn't too bad. At least it's got a little bit of a lift off from that logo that kind of separates it from the label itself. Avoid anything that looks like it might be champagne because we do not have the bottle and the bottle shape is not going to happen. Now, if you want to, you can make up your own label. It needs to be PG. It needs to conform to all of the marketing standards, which is basically you need to be able to see the entire label on the bottle in one glance. Because all these bottles, in theory, at the store line up next to each other. And it's very rare for a wine label to wrap all the way around where you got to take the bottle out and look at the sides. They really want to grab you right away so that you buy. Now, requirements for this, you cannot use anything that's a PNG because we need to take it into Photoshop. It needs to have a background and we need to make an alpha channel of it. PNGs do not work well in Maya. Maya does not like PNGs with transparency, I should say. Maya will use PNGs. But transparency, it doesn't know how to handle that transparency. You need to tell Maya transparency with a map. That map has to be black and white. So while this might work, you'd have to take it into Photoshop, have a white background on it. All right, anybody have a preference? We got a few labels here. All right, we could do Smith Street. We could do this one. Well, company name, too generic. Smith Street. How big is Rocco? Oh, let's do Rocco. At least it's got an interesting shape to it. So let's see what we get when we try to save image. All right, looks like we get a JPEG. Let's throw it on the desktop. Take a look at it. All right, yeah, this will work. We will need to do a little bit of cleanup on it. It's got some raggy bottom there. We can definitely fix that. All right, now, if you are brave, you can run Maya and Photoshop at the same time. I choose Life. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is let's throw this into the source images folder. So don't forget, all of your textures need to be in the source images folder of your Maya project folder. So I've got a separate Zen Garden image. And let's just make a new folder to throw inside there so I can keep all my files because I got a ton of wine labels in there. Rocco, red wine. Let's throw that in there. All right, let's launch Photoshop and start the process. Go to Rocco. Where we go? Red wine. Let's open this up. All right, so a couple things you need to look out for when you're dealing with trying to make an alpha channel. One thing is we need to be able to have enough space all around the logo, empty blank space. In this case, the background's white, so we want to have an extra white background all behind it, because unless you have a continuous background, the opacity map is not going to work properly. You're going to have areas that are clipped off, and it's not going to remove all of the geometry that you want it to. So in Photoshop, there's a few things you can do to an image. One, you can increase the size. The other is you can increase what's called the canvas that the image is sitting on. And when you open anything in Photoshop, it opens your image And the area that the image takes up is usually the size of the image you get. That's called your canvas, but Photoshop treats them separately. So you'll notice if you go up to the image menu, you'll see image size and canvas size. And Photoshop is able to understand the difference between the canvas, which is the size of the Photoshop document, and the image, which is what the image sits on in your canvas. Does that make sense? All right, so what we want to increase is the canvas size. And I'm always more comfortable with a little extra space around it, or at least between 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch. So I'm going to go up to image, go to image size, and you'll notice if you resize this, you can resize the resolution, you can resize a whole bunch of stuff. We don't want to go image size, we want to go canvas size. And you'll notice there are much less controls here. So a couple of interesting things about Photoshop is Photoshop also has what's called a canvas extension color, which means it tries to read your image and find out what the background is. And by default, if you don't do anything, if it is a normal JPEG image, it will give you a canvas extension color of white. You've got a choice of white, black, gray, other. It'll let you pick from the actual image itself. We want white because white works really well for our purposes. We want to have white as a background, and fortunately, our logo doesn't have any white on the edges, which will make it really easy to work. Now, when you go to expand the canvas, Photoshop has an anchor. By default, the anchor is in the center of the canvas, but you can also change it to any area in this 9-grid space. Generally, I want to expand it in all directions equally. But like I said, if you want to just pin the top and just have it expand to the right and down, that's fine. You can do that. If you pin it to the side, it will stay on the side, but it will expand to the right. It'll expand up and it will expand down. So center works really well. You can work in pixels. I prefer inches. So I'm going to go like 4 1/4 inches. And let's try 3.5. All right, so I'm going to click OK, and you'll see that Photoshop expanded the canvas, made the background white, and now my logo sits kind of right like an island in the middle of this white background. This is exactly what you want because this whole area in our alpha channel will be read as background, and we'll be able to remove it. Now, a couple things. I'm going to take a look, zoom in. The bottom here looks a little jagged. You know, if you want to, you can always get, you know, the paintbrush, make your background white. If you hold Shift down, Photoshop will constrain it so that it maintains its axis that you're going on. Right, there's a few jaggies up there, but I don't really think that's going to matter too much. That bottom would have caused us a little more trouble. All right, so we've got this. I'm going to save this as a PSD. This way, I've stopped compression. If anything happens, I don't lose any editing that I've done. All right, so part one, done. Go zoom, there we are. Let's put you back over here. All right, so what we want to do is select the background and turn that into an alpha channel. Now, a lot of selection tools in Photoshop. Probably one of the best ones is called the magic wand. The magic wand will let you select an area and whatever pixel you click on, by default, it will give you a tolerance of 32, which means it will pick pixels that are similar in value and color within a 32 pixel range from what you select, lighter, darker, color. So all you have to do is click. Fortunately, we've got a pretty good, nice white background, pretty decent edges. So if I click once on the white background, Photoshop's going to go ahead and select it. Now, if I want to zoom in, I can see kind of what's going on here. You can see there's a few goofy pixels here. So if you want to deselect and fix stuff, you can do Command D, which will deselect. Get my paintbrush. And let's see if there's any other floaters laying around there. All right, let's try selecting again. All right, got a little one right there. Okay, I see that. All right, let's select again. Yeah, that looks like it'll work. Oh, got one there. All right, so I've selected the background. Now, if I go into the channels section of Photoshop, you'll notice I've got a composite RGB, I've got a red channel, green channel, blue channel. At the bottom, if I click the plus sign, what it will do is create a new channel based on my selection. So if I click on it, you'll notice it says Alpha 1. Now, I don't want to do that because I've already got a selection. What I want to do is use the icon next to it because this just creates a blank, dumb alpha channel. So what I want to do is select the one next to it. This is the one that has create a new channel based on your selection. So if I click on that, notice that whatever I have selected is white, whatever I did not select is black. Now, the trouble with this is not going to give me what I want. Remember, it's creating an alpha based on your selection. I selected the background. What do I need to select? Say again? Yeah, I need to select the label itself. So let's delete this. And I'm just going to go back to layers for good measure. And in Photoshop, if you go up to the select menu, you can invert your selection, or it's called inverse, which is Shift Command I. What that will do is flip the selection. So now I've got the label selected. Now, if I go back into channels and create a new channel based on my selection, you'll notice that the background is black and now the label shape itself is white. This is exactly what I want. Because remember, in an opacity map or a mask, black is transparent, white is opaque or kept. Does that make sense? Questions? Any Zoom questions? Make sense? Amber has no questions. Jonathan, AJ. Jonathan's good. All right, so we want to make sure that we are in the RGB composite. We don't have to have the alpha channel selected because that will export the way we save it. I'm going to save my PSD, deselect my selection. And now we want to take this, save it as a Targa file so we can bring it back into Maya. When we save it as a Targa, we're going to save it as a 32-bit Targa file. All right. So we go File, Save As. And fortunately, since this was a JPEG, Photoshop said, oh, you can save as. So we go Save As. And I always like to put the word alpha, so I know that this is a color map with an alpha channel. All right, so our Targa options here. This is where you want to make sure that it's 32-bit. Fortunately, Photoshop is pretty smart. It said, oh, you made an alpha channel. You probably don't want to save this as a 24-bit. If you accidentally save it as 24, it will strip out the alpha channel, which is another reason you want to keep it as a PSD in case that happens and you have to go back in. So 32-bit, click OK. Let's take a look at what our map looks like. Here is the original. And here is the alpha. You can see the Mac preview program just kind of gives it a ghosty look behind it. That lets you know that it understands there's an alpha channel there, but not really sure how to display it other than make it transparent. So as long as you're happy with that, you can quit out of Photoshop. And now we can come into Maya and finish work. Any questions so far? Anything not make sense? I lose anybody? Okay. That's good. Set project. Why? Because I don't trust Maya. Lecture 10. All right, there's our wine label. Geometry. Let's go into the attributes. First thing we want to do is we want to plug it into the base color. We want to line it up, get it all set before we actually activate the alpha channel. So base color, click the checker button, create render node. Under create render node, we want to go 2D and we want to select file. This is just like bringing any other map in. All right, going to go into my Zen garden. Here's my Rocco red wine. And there is my alpha channel. So I'm going to click open. And don't forget, you have to hit 6 on the keyboard in order to be able to see your label or any textures at all. And the first thing you'll notice is we have multiple versions of this all over the place. That's because by default in our place 2D, it is set to wrap around until it fills the entire piece of geometry. So first thing you want to do, if you only want one copy, we don't want a contact sheet, is turn off wrap U, turn off wrap V, and now we only have a single copy. And again, this is in the place 2D that is assigned to the label. All right, so here's our wine label. Let me graph the network. There's our file node. Here's our place 2D. Turn off wrap U and V. All right, so let's take a look at this. My label looks like it's a bit stretched vertically. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the UVs. Chances are it's the UVs and not the file. We know the file is proportionate. So let's go up to the UV editor. Select the geometry, and you'll see there is our image. And that image is stretched to fit in the 0 to 1 space. Now, many of you probably, get upset over the fact that there are UVs hanging off the edge. It makes a difference if you need to do a collage. So if you were going to take this into Substance, yes, you would need to put your UVs in the shell. If you're going to take this into Unity or Unreal, yep, you'd have to do that. If you're doing software rendering, nobody cares, honestly. I know I just gave every modeling teacher a heart attack, but nobody cares until it needs to be a collage. So what this means is we can actually adjust the UVs rather than worry about anything else. So let's go UVs, let's just select it, and let's scale it. Now, by default, logic would dictate, oh, I want it to stretch, I want to stop it from stretching. That means I should probably make it a little less high. But the problem is you're increasing that image in that 0 to 1 space when you do that. So what you really want to do is kind of expand it a little. And what I'm trying to do is just match the logo here. Now, another thing you want to make sure is that you can see the label in the center of the bottle, and you can see glass or bottle all around the outside of the label. And that is also part of our requirements. If you take a look inside the SAL, where's it at? Look development, down at the bottom. I want to search. Oh, all right, I got it. Wrong one. All right, so down at the bottom, right around here, wine label. Okay, the glass of the wine bottle must be visible on all 4 sides. Yes, I know there are labels that wrap around really close to edges when you look at them, but for our requirements, you want to make sure you can see some glass on all 4 sides. This one works out okay for now. It could probably be a little bigger. So let's bring up the UV editor just a little. And let's make it just a touch bigger. And all I'm doing is scaling the UVs in a little so it takes up more space on the bottle. Save this and let's render it out, see what we get. Make sure we're in the render cam. There we go. All right, so a couple things you're going to notice, just like with the table, if you're doing the daytime, I got a lot of energy on the table. I got a lot of energy in the whole model. So I'm going to need to drop down the base weight for this label. So let's go down to something pretty close to what we have. All right, so it lines up okay. It's on there. Now we need to do the alpha channel part. So in the hypershade, and this is the easiest place to do it. I'm going to make sure I stop rendering. All right, so here's our alpha, out alpha. We want to put it into the opacity. Now you'll notice if I just grab the out alpha and bring it over here, anything that has a red input disappears. That's because it's expecting 3 channels. So let's expand the opacity section. Right here, you can see it is RGB. What we want to do is take the out alpha, plug it into each one of these RGB inputs individually. Now, here's what happens if you accidentally just do one. So let's do that one and see what happens. Now, let me close this window because I'm not sure it's actually giving me an update. There, it wasn't. So you can see it turned blue. So let's take the out alpha, plug that into green. Now the only thing that's left is blue. Let's take out alpha, plug that into blue. And now it got rid of all of the background. So like I said, it's very weird. You would think they would just have, since it's opacity, they would just have a black and white input, but they chose to have RGB. So it really does a good job removing unwanted parts of the geometry, which is why it's always nice if you're going to go through the trouble of doing that, get an interesting shape for the label if you can. Questions? Does that make sense? Amber's good. Jonathan's good. All right. So like I said, it can be a separate file if you want. It just needs to give you the results that you want. Removal of unwanted portions of geometry. It's also really good if you're making, say you've got a tablecloth on the table and you want to do kind of a tattered end. Go to the web, find some like torn edges. There's plenty of torn edge images out there, and you can just put that at the bottom of your UVs. You'll have to probably take the UVs into Photoshop, and so you can have them and paint that torn edge on the bottom, or you can probably find some kind of procedural in Substance to be able to do the same thing for you, when they will automatically go to the edges and give you that kind of randomized, ragged look. All right, let's save this. And let's head on. And let's talk about projection mapping. So as we just saw, we put a 2D texture on an object. We found a wine label. We used a file node. It had a place 2D. What happens if you want to take something small, a sticker, a decal, closest thing we have to a decal would be our maximum occupancy little sign over here over the desk, or even that piece of paper on the door in the back, talking about emergency exit only. So the nice thing about a decal is, since it is in 3D space, we are not stuck with it being in one location. We can move it all around, even if it is a cube or a cylinder. You can move it around in 3D space. Now, the one thing about projection mapping is we do not use it to map the base texture on anything. That is always done with just plain UVs. But on top of that, when we start adding layers, you want to have something movable so you can move that decal, that sticker, around. So you could put it down here, put it over here, put it sideways, do whatever you want it with it on the object. All right, so the only way to access projection mapping is by obviously clicking on the input connection in base color. But when it brings up the create render node, instead of left clicking on file, you must right click. So it would look something like this. You just bring up a new blank scene for now. And let me just create a plane. Polyplane, let's assign a new AI standard surface. There we go. And we click the input. That brings up create render node. So if I do 2D and left click, that's going to bring a file up. So it's going to look like this. "2D texture, file node right here, place 2D here," which will drive that. So let's call this one "2D," just for fun. Oh yeah, Maya does not like numbers at the beginning of any file name. All right, so let's bring up, create a new place to, or a new AI standard. This one will be 3D. So I click on base, create render node, 2D texture, but instead of left clicking, I right click and I get a contextual menu. You want to choose create as projection. So what will happen is, let's graph 3D here. What will happen is you will still get a file node and you'll get a place 2D, but They are being driven by the projector, which works basically just like a camera, just like a projector. It projects in the direction that the projector is pointing, and it is driven instead of 2D, which the file node is driven in 2D. This is driven in X, Y, and Z. So think of it kind of like a file node, sort of like a car. Mostly 2D, you can go in X and Y, and you're pretty much pinned to the ground unless you go flying over a cliff or a bump. You get airborne a little bit, but eventually you're going to hit the ground again. But with a projector, you take that car, put it on a really big helicopter. Now you've got 3D space. You've got the ability to go up and down, to go left and right, forwards, backwards, all directions. Now, when you create this 2D projector, what happens is at the center of the world, you will get this icon. Looks very much like an area light. The difference is that it has a little diamond in the corner. And this tells you that it is no longer, or it is not an area light. It is now a projector being driven in 3D space. Does that make sense so far? Now, the thing that you need to have, though, is something plugged into it to be able to see it. So let's select our file node. And for this, I've already got my project set to my Zen Garden. I've downloaded the SAL logo a while ago. And let's go into Zen Garden source images. And there's SAL right there. So I put that in. Now what I want to do is enable textures. So I got to hit 6 on the keyboard. Now you'll notice that nothing is showing up on the ground, except every once in a while you get stuff that kind of looks like music staff. The problem is this little pointer in our projector needs to be aimed at the object you want it to project on. And right now we're just projecting right across the top of this plane. So we need to rotate it. Now, once we rotate it, and generally you want to rotate it and have it aimed exactly at the object, which in our case is going to be a 90-degree angle. So, and we're rotating in X, so let's go X negative 90. So there it is. Now, the nice thing is I can move this around anywhere I want. If I did that with just a plain texture map, I'd have to go into the translate frame section of the place 2D and play with numbers. This, I just grab it and move it. Now, we have the same issue here that we had with the wine label, where we had everything wrapping around to fill the entire 0 to 1 space. Same thing with this SAL logo. It's small enough where it just has to keep repeating itself to fill the entire object. We generally don't want that with a decal, right? Decal is usually going to be a one-off. So what we want to do is get rid of the repeat U and V. That's going to be under the place 2D. We turn off wrap U, wrap V. And now we've just got one version of it that we can move around anywhere we want. Now we can scale it. We can rotate it. And since I'm just projecting this on a plane, I could move it, I could rotate it, but if I rotate it, it's basically going to disappear. All right, does that make sense so far? Any questions? Anybody? No? Okay. All right, so you'll notice there's a couple things going on here. One is that we have a really dark gray background wherever we don't have the decal, because the decal, by default, the sticker, the SAL logo, it has a white background. White background, black lettering. So that works out fine here, but does not really help us out with the background. So what happens is when you put a texture on a surface, most of it, Maya is built to expect that texture to fill the entire surface, the entire UV space, the entire object. In the case of a decal, we don't want it to. We want it to take a very small part. So what we need to do is, if we did not have anything to fill in this background, you would get a surface error. You would not have a material theoretically assigned to it. There would be nothing for it to display. It would probably come up green or turn black. So what Maya does in its infinite wisdom is, in the file node, down under color balance, there is a default color. And that default color is 50% gray, which is this background. So I can make that background lighter, or I can make it darker. Most of the time when we're dealing with a projection or a decal, we want this default color to match our background color. And our background color right now is white. So we generally want to have that be white also. So it kind of disappears. But I'm going to return this to just 50% gray for now, because this is going to be our guinea pig for talking about layering too. Because most of the time you want to have this decal on top of something else. You need a base. You either need another color, or maybe you've got a texture. Maybe you've got wood, maybe you've got concrete, maybe you've got brick. It doesn't matter. Does that make sense so far? All right, so let's take a look at, we talked about our file mapping methods. Let's take a look at layering in Maya. Because, I mean, if you're in Substance, what would you have? Well, you'd have a fill layer, right? You'd have brick, you'd have concrete, you'd have wood. And then on top of that, you'd make another layer and put your decal on it and just move it around. Well, in Maya, we can do the same thing, but we need to use what's called a layered texture. Now, layered textures in Maya they're very functional. They're not as elegant as Photoshop or Substance, but they do get the job done. In fact, everybody's been saying for the last 10 years, why doesn't Maya update it? Quite frankly, I think Maya just doesn't really want to go into that direction. They're just relying, everybody's going to either go into Photoshop or Substance or some other layering application. But in reality, we do a lot of layering work in Maya anyway. So here's the way Maya's layering system works compared to Photoshop. Maya's layering system is horizontal rather than vertical. Why? No idea. It's been that way forever. So what that means is your top layer is all the way to the left. So this is your top layer. This is your bottom layer, or anything subsequently under it. Now, in Photoshop or in Substance, you can click the new layer icon and get a new layer. New fill layer, in Photoshop, new layer. In Maya, we can't do that. In Maya, let me show you. Well, let's finish just looking at this. So in Maya, you basically click anywhere in this blank area where it says layer texture attributes. We've got icons of a layer. In Photoshop, you want to move a layer around, or in Substance, you grab it, you left click, you drag it. In Maya, for some reason, it does not like left clicking. You must middle mouse click and move it. So you either move the bottom layer to the top or the top layer down. In Photoshop and Substance, if you want to delete a layer, select it, hit delete. Great. In Maya, can't do that. Maya, you actually need to click the little X that is underneath each layer icon. Trouble is, if you miss that little X, you will accidentally create a new layer. And when you create a new layer, you get more frustrated and you try and click the X and you keep missing and you have 100 layers. There is no way, unfortunately, to select multiple layers and delete them like there is in any other sane application. So be careful. So any layer you select, the attributes under it will become active. There's a color input, just like there is for the base color. There's an alpha, which is equivalent to Photoshop's opacity. There's a blend mode, which is very similar to Photoshop's blend mode of normal. And then there is a visibility switch, which is layer is visible, similar to the eye icon in Photoshop. All right, so in Maya, let me clear this. And let's create a new, well, let's delete this whole network right now. There we go. Notice it turned green. It got all upset. So let's assign a brand new Arnold AI standard surface. So usually the workflow is, if you suspect you're going to do layering in Maya, you want to start off in your base color with not a place 2D or a 3D. You want to go down to other layers. Layer texture is the only thing sitting in other textures. So if I click on it, there is my base layer. And it's going to be that disgusting lime green to remind you, hey, if you don't do anything, this is what's going to display. You need to put something in there. Unlike Photoshop, which gives you a blank, empty, transparent layer. Now, so if you want to add more layers, like I said, just click anywhere in this blank area. To delete them, you have to click on the little X button underneath. And like I said, if you accidentally miss, you create way many more. So selecting a layer activates the attributes underneath. So let's make this one red, and we'll make this one blue. Now notice you can't see red because green is covering it up. Green is my top layer, blue is my bottom layer. So if I select green and turn the visibility off, I'll see red, but I won't see blue because blue is under red. Now, to move them around, middle mouse click, so I can take blue, middle mouse click, drop it in front. Why didn't it update? Because it's Maya. See what I mean? Takes 15 times, click off and on, finally it comes back. Put red. Now, I can ghost red so that it lets blue show through a little bit simply by selecting the top layer and turning the alpha down. Although it's not really fond of showing it too well in the viewport. Why? I don't know. Now, one reason would be that the blend mode was set for none, which means it's always going to cover it up. So you need to set the blend mode to over in order for it to be able to ghost properly. So let me put red back on top. Let's see if that makes sense. Let's change that to over and then play. Yeah, there we go. All right, now, here is what your network looks like with a layered texture. Layered texture has no transform information. It doesn't care what you put in it. The transform information comes from your file node or your projection. Either a 2D if you're just doing a texture, or a 3D if you're doing a projection. No transform, it is just a container for textures to sit on top of each other and you control with blend modes. Questions? All right, so that part's pretty simple. Let's talk a little bit about blend modes. For times when you don't just want to ghost something underneath or on top of something else. There are 3 common layering blend modes. Right now we're using over, and that lets us kind of ghost stuff underneath other layers. The most popular ones are going to be add or multiply. And the way they work is with simple math. You basically use add to get rid of black in a layer, or you use multiply to get rid of white. Let's find out why just doing these simple equations. So first off, we need to assign a value to black and white. So what value is associated with black? 0, right? How about white? 1. Good. So let's plug 0 and 1 into each of these equations. Well, actually, I shouldn't say equations. Simple addition or simple multiplication. Now, what we're looking for is a random number that's going to be a substitute for a texture for us. Texture could also be our logo, our sticker, our decal. So somebody give me a number, doesn't matter what it is. 4. All right. So 4, let's plug 4 into here. And let's say that 4 has a black background and 4 has a white background. Our job is to get rid of the white, keep the red unchanged, or get rid of the black background, keep red unchanged. So the way it works is, let's do our simple math here. 0, which is 4, our decal sitting on top of a black background. If we use add, what are we going to get as a sum? 4. How about if we have a white background? What are we going to get? 5. So if we have a black background, we can remove it by using add. If 4 is on a white background and we try to use add, it's going to change how our logo or decal looks. So let's do multiply. 0 times 4 is what? 0. So if we have a black background and we try to use multiply, it's going to get rid of the white or get rid of your decal and keep black. That's the only thing it's going to keep. So now if we have a white background and we multiply, what are we going to get here? 4. If you understand that, actually, it's even simpler than this. If you choose one and it gives you the wrong results, you got a 50-50 chance. Let's be honest. All right, doesn't work, choose the other one. These are probably two of the most, most common used compositing flags that are out there. Even if you're doing professional compositing. Well, you use over also a lot more than we use here. You're either going to use over, add, multiply. All right, so client gives us this logo, says we want to remove the white. What blend mode are we going to use? Yeah, we'd use multiply. So white is 1. If we multiply it, that means our decal here is 4. We're going to be left with 4. Okay. How about we have a black background. Client wants the black background removed. They want white paint on the object, whatever it happens to be. What blend mode are you going to use? Yep, you're going to use add. Like I said, if you use multiply and you realize, oh, it took my white away, you made the wrong decision. Just flip it over to the opposite. Does that make sense? All right, so let's put that into practice here with our little example we have going on in Maya. So what I'm going to do is, well, tell you what, let's use what we've got going on here. So let's choose, well, let's choose blue. We'll keep blue. I want blue to be my base color that my decal is going to sit on top of. So what I need to do is I can either delete all of these layers and start again, or I can simply move my blue to the back. There we go. Simply move my blue to the back, select my top layer, and remember your decal needs to be on top. It needs to sit on top of your bottom layer, your background. So this is where I want to map in my logo, my decal. So we do that the same way we do in the base color. So you select your layer, go to color, click the input button. You want to go 2D. If you want to create a projection, don't forget you have to right click on File, Create as Projection. You want to go to the File node. Let's bring in our SAL logo, which is right here. Let's graph our network again. Which one is this? Number 2. Let's graph that. There we are. Now, got to make sure, which I forgot to do, make sure your layer is visible. Let me Z back. There we go. All right, so let me Z back just for sake. There we go. So as soon as I edit my decal, notice that it covers my entire layer. So now here comes the part where we need to first get rid of all the extra iterations of our decal. Don't forget that can be done in the place 2D. You want to uncheck wrap U and wrap V. And you're saying, okay, great, I did that, but why is my decal, why doesn't it have a background? Well, part of the problem is that it is set right now to cover up completely the layer on underneath of it. So what we need to do is change the blend mode. We want to get rid of the white background. So what do we use? We use multiply. So let's go to multiply. Now notice it got rid of it. I got a nice blue here, but I've got a really dark blue here. Well, that came from this default color. And every time you have a decal and it does not cover the entire object area, in the file node, the default color, which is all of this around here, is going to be 50% gray. When you're dealing with projections, you want to make sure that your decal background color is set in default color to be the same. So we want this to be white. Now, if I go back to my layer texture and I change my blend mode to multiply, now I've got my SEL logo on top of a blue background. Right. Does that make sense? Questions? Now, that blue background doesn't necessarily have to be a solid color. You could have, say, for example, you have a wood texture there. So let me plug in a wood texture, and I'm not going to project that wood texture because that's going to be my base. You always put that on as a regular file, not left clicking. And I think I do have some wood here. Where is it at? Actually, it might be up a level. There we go. Let's do that. So now it doesn't matter what I have my projection on top of. I could have it on a solid color, could have it on a texture, could have it on pretty much anything. And from this point, you can keep adding in layers. Could always add another decal. Just create a new layer, put that in front, come in, click the input button on the color of that layer, right click on file. Let's create another projection. And this time, let's bring in the AAA logo. Where's that at? That might be up a layer. Here it is, right here. So now I've got two projections in there. Let's aim it at the ground. I got extra logos here. How do I get rid of the extra copies? Here's my new network. Well, don't forget, it all takes place down here in the place 2D. Turn off wrap U, wrap V. What's my blend mode? Oh, it's got a white background. So blend mode in the file. Well, yeah, you're right. It's going to be multiply. So let's multiply that out. So that gives us the logo, but it creates that really dark background, which is all part of the default color. That default color needs to match the background of your decal, which is white. Now, a lot of times, if you've got something, especially if you've got something outside, and if you're doing the exterior scene, you are required to do one projection. If you're doing the interior, got the same requirements. So for the interior, you could choose to do it on the thermos, that thermal container we have on the table. That's where that AAA logo came from. You could also put it on the desk. You could put it on the wall. We need to have a projection done in Maya. If you're doing the exterior, you can do it on the table. You could do it on the cutting board. Table's probably a lot easier. It's a bigger surface area. Project it on there. A lot of times you want to make it look like it's worn, or maybe that ink or paint has bled in or worn off. So you really want to have your object be visible through it. So what we can do is we can select the layer that we're in. So for example, here's the AAA layer right here. If I turn that visibility off, it goes away. All right, so a lot of times what we can do is we can sort of ghost this by dropping down the alpha a little, and it will allow that texture underneath of it to show through. This way it starts to look like it's either kind of worn in or been absorbed into the material. Questions? Yes, no? All right. So questions? Let's see. Jonathan, you got any questions? AJ, questions? Jonathan's good. All right, this is a good time to take a break then. If nobody has any questions, we'll come back. I'll show you how to do it to the table outside on the exterior, and I'll show you how to do it on the thermos in the interior, because that is a little different since it is a metal material. All right, so let's go on break and come back at 2. Come back at 2:57.
I'm not sure if it's so great, so I'm gonna pretend that